In just 47 seconds, one of Britain's most beloved chat shows descended into absolute chaos. What began as friendly banter exploded into a vicious on-air battle that saw Hollywood tough guy Tom Hardy storm off the set after being kicked off by Jonathon Ross himself. Voices were raised, insults were thrown, and the entire studio audience sat in stunned silence as two entertainment giants tore each other apart on live television. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the moments celebrities don't want you to see, and the truth behind the glamorous facade. Last night's episode of The Jonathon Ross Show was supposed to be another star-studded evening of laughs and promotion. Tom Hardy was there to discuss his latest film project, a gritty crime thriller that had critics buzzing. The actor walked onto the stage with his usual intensity, dressed in a dark jacket and that trademark brooding expression that had made him one of the most compelling actors of his generation. The audience erupted in applause as he shook Ross's hand and settled into the guest chair. Ross opened with his typical enthusiasm, complimenting Hardy's performance in the new film. Hardy nodded, offering brief responses, his jaw tight as he spoke. There was an edge to him from the start, something simmering beneath the surface that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable being there. "So, Tom, you've done it again, mate," Ross said, grinning widely. "Another brutal, violent character. Do you ever fancy doing a romantic comedy? Maybe something where you're not covered in blood and grime?" The audience laughed, but Hardy's expression remained unchanged. "I do the roles that interest me," he replied flatly. "I'm not really concerned with what people expect or want to see." Ross chuckled, clearly trying to keep the mood light. Right. But come on, you must get tired of being the hard man all the time. Don't you want to show your softer side?" Hardy shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I don't really think about it like that, Jonathon. I'm an actor. I act. That's what I do." There was a brief, awkward pause. Ross pressed on, seemingly unaware of or choosing to ignore the growing tension. "Well, your fans would love to see you do something different. Maybe sing and dance a bit, eh?" He laughed at his own joke, and a few audience members joined in nervously. Hardy didn't laugh. Instead, he stared at Ross with an intensity that made the studio feel suddenly colder. "Is that what you brought me here for? To take the piss?" Ross's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. No, mate, just having a laugh. You know how it is." "I actually don't," Hardy shot back, his voice low and measured. "You invite me on your show, and then you mock the work I do. That's not having a laugh. That's being disrespectful." The audience had gone completely silent now. Ross shifted in his chair, his famous confidence beginning to crack. "Tom, I'm not mocking anything. I was just joking around. It's what we do on this show." Hardy leaned forward slightly, his presence suddenly dominating the space. "Maybe that's the problem with your show then. You treat your guests like they're here for your entertainment, to be your little puppets so you can get your laughs." Ross's face reddened. He forced another chuckle, but it sounded hollow. "That's a bit harsh, don't you think? I mean, you knew what you were signing up for when you agreed to come on." "Did I?" Hardy's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried through the entire studio. "Did I sign up to be belittled? To have my career choices questioned like I'm some kind of joke?" Ross was clearly flustered now, glancing toward his producers off camera before looking back at Hardy. "Look, Tom, I think you're overreacting here. It was just a bit of banter. This is a comedy chat show. We have fun here." "Fun for who?" Hardy demanded, his voice rising. "Fun for you? Because it's not fun for me to sit here while you patronize me." The host tried a different approach, his tone becoming more serious. "All right, let's just take a breath here. I apologize if I offended you. That genuinely wasn't my intention. Can we start over?" Hardy sat back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest, his entire posture radiated hostility. "You can try, but I'm not sure I'm interested in giving you another chance to embarrass yourself." Ross's jaw tightened. For a moment, the mask of the cheerful television presenter slipped completely, revealing genuine anger underneath. "Embarrass myself? I'm not the one having a tantrum on live television, mate." The audience gasped collectively. Several people covered their mouths in shock. This was no longer a minor disagreement. Battle lines had been drawn. Hardy's eyes blazed. "A tantrum? Is that what you call it when someone stands up for themselves? When someone refuses to be your performing monkey? Oh, give me a break, Ross snapped, his voice losing all pretense of friendliness. You walk on here with your attitude, acting like you're too good for this show, too good to have a normal conversation. The arrogance is unbelievable. Arrogance? Hardy's voice was dangerously quiet again. You sit there in your fancy chair, playing to your audience, thinking you're clever with your little jokes and your rehearsed questions, and you want to talk to me about arrogance? Ross pointed a finger at Hardy, his face now fully flushed with anger. I've been doing this show for years. Years. I've interviewed hundreds of actors, musicians, comedians. You know what the difference is between them and you? They know how to have a conversation. They know how to be gracious guests. Hardy leaned forward again, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Gracious? You want me to be gracious while you insult my work? While you reduce everything I do to some punchline for your audience to giggle at? I didn't insult your work, Ross shouted, his composure completely gone now. I made a light-hearted comment about you maybe trying different roles. That's not an insult. That's called conversation. No, Hardy said, his voice steady despite the fury in his eyes. That's called disrespect, and I'm not going to sit here and take it. Ross threw his hands up in frustration. Then what do you want, Tom? You want me to kiss your arse? To tell you how amazing and untouchable you are? Is that what this is about? The actor stood up slowly, unbuttoning his jacket with deliberate movements. The entire studio seemed to hold its breath. What I want is basic respect. Something you clearly don't understand how to give. Sit down, Ross said, his voice sharp. We're not done here. Hardy laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a cold, bitter sound that sent chills through the audience. Yes, we are. We're very much done. Ross stood up as well now, the two men facing each other across the coffee table that separated them. You don't just walk off my show. Nobody walks off my show. Watch me. Hardy replied simply, the host's face contorted with rage. You know what your problem is? You think because you play tough guys in movies, you are a tough guy. But standing here right now, all I see is an overpaid, oversensitive actor who can't take a bloody joke. The words hung in the air like poison. Hardy's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went completely cold. And all I see is a desperate man clinging to relevance by trying to tear down people who are actually talented. Ross's mouth fell open. The audience gasped again, louder this time. Several people could be heard murmuring in shock at what they were witnessing. Desperate? Ross's voice shook with barely contained fury. You little shit. I've forgotten more about this industry than you'll ever know. Then maybe it's time you retired, Hardy said calmly, which somehow made the insult even more devastating. Before you embarrass yourself any further. Ross stepped around the coffee table, moving closer to Hardy. The studio crew started to move forward, clearly concerned about what might happen next. You come on my show, you disrespect me in front of my audience, and you have the nerve to tell me to retire? Hardy didn't back away. He stood his ground, meeting Ross's glare with equal intensity. I didn't disrespect you. I responded to your disrespect with honesty. If you don't like hearing the truth, that's your problem, not mine. The truth? Ross laughed harshly. You wouldn't know the truth if it bit you. You're so far up your own arse, you can't see how ridiculous you look right now. I look ridiculous? Hardy gestured around the studio. Look at yourself, Jonathon. You're having a meltdown because your guest wouldn't play along with your bullshit. You're proving everything I said about you right. Ross's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Get off my stage! Get the hell off my stage right now! Hardy raised an eyebrow. Kicking me off now? I thought nobody walks off your show. I'm not giving you the satisfaction of walking off, Ross snarled. You're being removed. You're done. Get out. The actor smiled, but it was a predatory expression. There it is. The real Jonathon Ross. Not the cheeky chappy everyone thinks they know. Just an angry little man who can't handle being challenged. Security, Ross shouted, looking off camera. Get him out of here. Hardy held up his hands in mock surrender. Don't worry. I'm leaving. I wouldn't want to stay on this pathetic excuse for a show another second anyway. Pathetic? Ross's voice had gone hoarse from shouting. My show is pathetic? Have you looked at yourself lately? You're a joke, Tom. A bloody joke. Hardy started walking toward the exit, but he paused, and turned back to face Ross one last time. You know what the difference is between me and you, Jonathon? When I leave here tonight, I'll go back to doing what I love, working with people who respect me. You'll still be here, desperately trying to convince yourself that you matter. Ross pointed toward the exit, his arms shaking with rage. Get out! Get the fuck out! The audience sat in complete silence. Some people with their hands over their mouths, others looking like they wished they could disappear. No one knew where to look or what to do. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a genuine, ugly confrontation playing out in real time. Hardy turned back toward the exit, his footsteps echoing through the silent studio. But Ross wasn't done yet. You'll regret this, the host shouted after him. You think you can treat me like this and just walk away? I'll make sure everyone knows what you're really like. Hardy stopped walking but didn't turn around. His voice carried back across the studio, cold and final. Do whatever you need to do, Jonathon. I'm sure your ego requires it, but we both know the truth. We both know who looked like the fool tonight. I'm not the fool, Ross screamed, his voice cracking. You're the fool. You're the arrogant, self-important fool. The actor continued walking, reaching the edge of the stage. A producer tried to say something to him, but Hardy brushed past without acknowledging them. Ross stood in the middle of his stage, chest heaving, face scarlet, looking around at his silent audience. What are you all staring at? He demanded. The interview's over, show's over. Everyone can go home. But Hardy wasn't quite gone yet. He paused at the studio door, visible to the cameras, and looked back one last time. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The look on his face said everything. It was a look of pure contempt, of someone who had just confirmed everything they suspected about another person. Then he walked through the door and was gone. Ross stood alone on his stage, surrounded by his crew, his audience, and cameras that had captured every moment of the disaster. His hands were still shaking. His face was still red. He looked around wildly, as if searching for something to say, some way to salvage what had just happened. Well, he finally said, his voice rough and uncertain. That was unexpected. Nobody laughed. Nobody clapped. The audience just stared at him, looking uncomfortable and confused. Some people were already getting up to leave, clearly wanting to escape the terrible atmosphere that had engulfed the studio. A producer approached Ross, speaking quietly in his ear. The host shook his head repeatedly, waving the producer away. I don't want to hear it, he said loudly enough for the microphones to pick up. I don't want to hear any of it. He was disrespectful. He was rude. This isn't my fault. But even as he said the words, they sounded hollow. The cameras had caught everything. The audience had seen everything. There was no spin that could change what had actually happened. Ross's co-host, who had been sitting silently throughout the entire confrontation, finally spoke up. Maybe we should take a break, yeah? Just calm down for a minute. Calm down? Ross whirled on them. Don't tell me to calm down. You saw what he did. You saw how he acted. I saw what both of you did, the co-host said carefully. And I think maybe everyone just needs a moment. Ross opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to deflate slightly. He ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly exhausted. Fine. Take a break. Do whatever you want. I need a drink. He walked off the stage without another word, leaving his co-host, his crew, and his audience in stunned silence. The cameras kept rolling for another few moments, capturing the aftermath of the confrontation. People in the audience were talking in hushed voices, their phones out, undoubtedly already posting about what they'd just witnessed. Backstage, Hardy was gathering his things, his face set in hard lines. A staff member approached him cautiously. Mr. Hardy, are you all right? Can we get you anything? He looked at the young woman and his expression softened slightly. I'm fine. Thank you for asking. Sorry you had to witness that. It's not your fault, she said quietly. He shouldn't have said those things. Hardy gave her a brief nod, then finished collecting his belongings. Another member of the crew approached, this one looking more official. Mr. Hardy, I just want to apologize on behalf of the show. That shouldn't have happened. No, it shouldn't have, Hardy agreed. But it did. And now everyone knows exactly who Jonathon Ross really is when the cameras catch him off guard. Will you be making a statement? The crew member asked nervously. Hardy shook his head. I don't need to make a statement. What happened out there speaks for itself. Anyone with eyes could see what went down. Back in the studio, Audience members were being ushered out. Many were still recording on their phones, capturing the chaotic aftermath. The atmosphere was electric, with shock and excitement. This wasn't what anyone had expected when they'd gotten tickets to a talk show taping. One audience member could be heard saying to their friend, "Did you see Ross's face? I thought he was going to actually hit him." Hardy didn't back down though, the friend replied. Just stood there calm as anything while Ross lost his mind. Near the exit, Ross had returned, trying to compose himself and speak to some of the remaining audience members. "Look, I'm sorry you had to see that. Sometimes guests come on with an attitude and, well, you saw what happened." But the people he was talking to didn't look convinced. They nodded politely, but their expressions suggested they'd formed their own opinions about who was at fault. A producer pulled Ross aside. "We need to talk about damage control. This is going to be everywhere by morning." "I know that," Ross snapped. "I'm not stupid. But what was I supposed to do? Let him insult me on my own show? Maybe not escalate it to the point where you're screaming and swearing at a guest?" the producer suggested carefully. Ross's face reddened again. "Don't you start. He was the one who started it. He was the one being difficult." "That's not how it's going to look when this airs," the producer said quietly. "And it's definitely not how it's going to look in all the clips that are already being posted online." The reality of the situation seemed to finally sink in. Ross closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "Fuck. This is bad, isn't it?" "It's not good," the producer admitted. "We need to figure out what we're going to say, how we're going to handle this." Meanwhile, Hardy had left the building entirely. He climbed into a waiting car, his face impassive. The driver looked at him in the rearview mirror. "Everything all right, Mr. Hardy?" "Just drive," Hardy said quietly. "Get me out of here." As the car pulled away, Hardy stared out the window at the studio building fading into the distance. His phone was already buzzing with messages, but he ignored them. He knew what would be waiting for him when he finally checked. Questions, concerns, people wanting his side of the story. But he didn't need to give his side. The footage would do that for him. Anyone who watched what had happened would see a host who couldn't handle a guest pushing back against his mockery. They'd see someone who lost control, who let their ego and anger turn a conversation into a shouting match. Back at the studio, the remaining crew were packing up in a daze. The co-host found Ross sitting in his dressing room, head in his hands. "Hey," they said gently. "You okay?" Ross looked up, and for a moment, he looked genuinely lost. "I fucked up, didn't I?" The co-host sat down beside him. "It got out of hand. You both said things you probably shouldn't have, but it was mostly me, wasn't it?" Ross's voice was small now, all the bluster gone. "I pushed too hard. I couldn't let it go." "Maybe," the co-host admitted. "But what's done is done. Now you need to figure out how to move forward." Ross nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he knew there was no easy path forward from this. The confrontation had been too public, too raw, too real. There was no taking back words spoken in anger on live television. In the editing bay, the team was already reviewing the footage, trying to figure out what could be salvaged. But they all knew the truth. This wasn't something that could be edited into something palatable. The confrontation had been the show. Everything else was just filler. One editor shook their head. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never seen anything like this. Never seen Ross lose it like that." "Hardy really got under his skin," another editor observed. "From the moment he pushed back on that first joke, you could see Ross didn't know how to handle it." "Because Ross is used to guests playing along," the first editor said. "He's used to people laughing at his jokes and going with the flow. Hardy didn't do that. He challenged him, and Ross couldn't handle being challenged." The footage kept playing on the monitors, Ross's face getting redder. Hardy's calm, steady responses that seemed to make the host even angrier. The pointing fingers, the shouting, the moment Ross ordered Hardy off the stage. "This is going to be talked about for years," one of the editors said quietly. "This is the kind of thing that defines a show, that defines a career." And they were right. Already, even as the crew packed up and went home, the clips were spreading online. Phones that had recorded the confrontation were uploading videos. People who had been in the audience were sharing their experiences. The hashtags were trending. Tom Hardy, Jonathon Ross, the interview that exploded. The confrontation nobody saw coming. The moment a talk show turned into a battleground. Hardy was in his hotel room now, finally checking his phone. Messages from his agent, his publicist, friends and colleagues, all asking the same things. What happened? Are you okay? Do you need anything? He typed out a brief message to his agent. I'm fine. Ross crossed the line. I responded. That's all. His agent replied immediately. Everyone's talking about it. You're trending worldwide. Some people are saying you overreacted. Others are saying Ross was out of line. Hardy didn't reply. He didn't need to defend himself. He knew what had happened. He knew why he'd responded the way he had. And he knew that anyone who watched the full footage would see a host who couldn't handle a guest who refused to be mocked. Back at his home, Ross was scrolling through his own phone, seeing the reactions pouring in. Some people were defending him, saying Hardy had been disrespectful from the start, but many more were criticizing him, pointing out that he'd lost control, that he'd been the one to escalate things. One comment stung particularly hard. Ross couldn't handle someone not playing along with his bit. The mask slipped and we saw the real him. Not pretty. He threw his phone across the room, watching it bounce off the sofa. His wife appeared in the doorway. That bad? It's a disaster, Ross admitted. I let him get to me. I shouldn't have, but I did. And now everyone's going to remember this as the time I kicked Tom Hardy off my show, because I couldn't control my temper. Maybe it'll blow over, his wife suggested, though her tone suggested she didn't really believe it. It won't, Ross said heavily. This is the kind of thing that sticks. This is the kind of thing that people don't forget. And he was right. As the night wore on, the story only grew bigger. More angles emerged, more analysis, more debate about who was right and who was wrong. But regardless of whose side people took, one thing was clear. Something had broken on that stage. The carefully maintained illusion of the friendly chat show had shattered, revealing the tensions and egos that lay beneath. And it had all happened live, for everyone to see. Hardy lay in his hotel bed, staring at the ceiling. He didn't regret what he'd said. He didn't regret standing up for himself. But he knew this would follow him, that it would be brought up in future interviews, that people would always want to know about that time you got kicked off the Jonathon Ross show. Ross lay in his own bed, replaying the confrontation in his mind. The things he'd said. The way he'd lost control. The look on Hardy's face as he'd walked away. And he wondered if he could have handled it differently. If he should have just laughed off Hardy's initial pushback, instead of letting it escalate. But it was too late for should-haves and could-haves. The damage was done. The words were spoken. The footage was out there for the world to see and judge. In the morning, the tabloids would have their headlines. The entertainment shows would have their segments. The social media debates would rage on. But for now, in the quiet hours after midnight, two men lay awake in different parts of the city, both replaying the same confrontation, both knowing that their careers had been changed by 47 seconds of pure, unfiltered conflict on live television. The show had ended. The audience had gone home. The cameras had stopped rolling. But the impact of what had happened would echo for far longer than anyone could have predicted when Tom Hardy had first walked onto that stage.